Hey everybody, it's Professor Parish. I hope you guys are doing well and that you're enjoying the class so far. So what are we doing today? Well, this week there's not really a video about any of our fiction chapters for week 5. So instead I want to go over MLA, the wonderful world of the Modern Language Association. And I also wanted to talk about finding sources for your papers, especially talking about the research paper that we will eventually do later on this semester. So, as always, if you have any questions about the class, about assignments, about these presentations, anything like that, feel free to email me or call me at my extension. So, MLA. Obviously this is English 122, so chances are if you took English 121 or freshman English here at SIC, you probably have been taught a little bit about the basics with MLA. Some of you, depending on what high school you went to, maybe your English instructor had you do MLA a lot, or maybe not. The reason I go over MLA pretty heavily in this class is for a number of different reasons. One, because this is really, unless you take world literature or a creative writing course, this is kind of your last English class of college, unless you're an English major. So chances are you probably will not have another class talk about MLA and formatting for it. So it's important that, I feel it's important that you get all of those basics and techniques down now so you can use them later on in your other classes. Secondly, I feel that going over this is really important because MLA changes quite a bit. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So chances are that perhaps the MLA that you used in high school, it very well could have been an outdated form of MLA. It could have been a form of MLA your teacher was comfortable with and didn't want to change. There's lots of different reasons, for whatever reason, that maybe you don't feel comfortable with MLA, and so I want to go over that for you. So on our course homepage, you will see that in our handout section, in week 1, there is an MLA citation presentation. And I'm very happy that in this particular section, it's been downloaded 21 times. Cool. Please make sure that you save a copy of this onto your phone, onto your computer, tablet, whatever, so that you can pull it up and reference it as you're completing your work citations, works cited page, your citations, anything you're doing that is related to MLA this semester. So, with that being said, we are going to jump right in and talk about MLA. So, start here. Yeah. So basically, this presentation is going to go over what MLA is, about picking proper sources, and about how to cite MLA and the different ways in which we use it. Because here's the thing about MLA. A lot of students will ask, well, what's the point of it? Why do we do a works cited page? Why do we do this? Well, I will let you know that if you've never tried to publish anything in your life, the industry is hard. It's not like E.L. James' 50 Shades of Grey. We just typed it out on our phone and sent it to a publisher and it made millions overnight. That's not how academic publishing works. A lot of times academics and researchers, they spend years, literally years, not only writing their work, but also having it reviewed, having it published, having it dispersed throughout the community, and then finally being cited. For example, one of my college professors, she decided after the semester I graduated grad school, she decided that she wanted to create a textbook with different chapters about authorship. And each of us that were in her final class, we all were going to contribute a chapter. And it was a lot of fun. It was great to write it, but in the end, it took not only a couple months to write the article, my one chapter in that book, but it took actually 2 years before the book was even published. So there's a lot of hard work and sweat and tears that go into publishing in the academic world. So chances are these authors, myself included, definitely want our work to be cited and not just taken up by somebody as if it was their own words, right? We aren't born with the knowledge of how chemicals work or the knowledge of how political science influences society. We're not born with that information. We learn it from somewhere. And chances are that we cherry pick pieces of information from these sources we learn and put that into our own conversations and our own texts. So if I'm a reader, I may read your article and see a source or a piece of information that you cite, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I want to read the rest of that article. If you don't cite where you got that source from, there's no continuing dialogue. There's no continuing conversation. We don't learn anything from it. We just get little tiny bits and pieces of information, and that's it. And that's not really continuing our learning or our education. So, long story short, we give credit where credit is due. And that's where MLA comes in. Now, there are many different types of citation formats, and it really depends on what your major is, whether you use MLA, which is the Modern Language Association, which is used by a lot of humanities, or perhaps you'll use APA, which is the American Psychological Association. It's often used by a lot of medical professions, although more and more humanities are slowly starting to use APA. And then there's even older formats like Chicago Manual of Style. There's a scientific citation format. It really depends on what you end up doing. But one thing is true of all of these citation formats. They all follow basic formulas. MLA is the math of English. And I will be honest, it can be confusing at first. It can be hard to memorize the patterns and formulas, but that's what this presentation is for. This is a resource for you all to have, to look back on, to check yourself with, however it helps you to do citations. My biggest piece of advice is the more you practice and the more you use MLA or APA or any format, the more fluent and better you become at doing it. You just got to make sure you're doing it the right way. All right, so enough intro there. Before we get to talk about citations, I do want to bring up this part of the presentation. And again, you can always go back and read this and look this over. But these first couple of slides are pertaining especially to our last paper in this class, paper number 4, which we won't really get into until about end of October is when we'll start talking about paper 4. So basically, when you look for sources, you want to make sure that they're credible. And we are saturated with so many different types of sources that we can choose from anymore. It can become harder and harder to figure out, is my source credible or not? So here's the basic guidelines. You want to make sure that your source is unbiased, or we'll talk about this in a minute, that you acknowledge its bias. It's from a credible source, so it's not just from bigfootisreal.org. It's from somewhere credible like a news source or a blog, maybe a scientific journal, something that's peer-reviewed. When I say a peer-reviewed journal, what that means is there's actually a process in the academic world to get published. You don't just submit an article and they're like, awesome, cool, thanks for writing that. You're an author. That's not how it works. What actually happens is with a peer-reviewed journal, let's say I'm writing for the American Psychological Association. I have an article about psychology. I send it in to the journal. They will take my name off of it, so it's anonymous, and they will send my article to 2 different people. These people do not know each other. They don't know each other is getting the article. It's a blind review. And they will read my article and decide whether or not it is suitable for that journal I've submitted it to. Now, both of them, neither of them keep in contact with each other because they don't know either has the article. If both of them say, yes, this article fits your journal, I will get published. If one of them says no, it's out. I won't get published. So you're depending on 2 random people to tell you that your article is worthy of that journal. That makes the publishing likelihood a lot harder. So typically we consider peer-reviewed articles to be very credible because they're reviewed by people that are experts of the industry or experts in the journal. And if both of these random people say it's good, then clearly it's going to be considered credible because there has to be 100% pass rate in order for you to get published. Otherwise, you don't at all and you get rejected. So it's a very scrutinized, very slim chance that you'll get published unless you're really good and your article is very factual, credible, and accurate. So if you are citing a peer-reviewed journal, I would consider that to always be credible. You want to make sure that you're getting facts, or if it's a personal testimony like someone's actual story, that it's noted that it's not factual, it's just their story. And then you want to make sure it's timely. I know a lot of you will maybe cite pieces of literature or poetry or drama that's from ancient Greek times or Shakespearean times or even something like the 1900s. And we can't avoid that. That's just part of it. But if someone's giving an analysis of that piece, you want to make sure it's timely. Usually within the last 5 years is considered timely for commentary or review that you're citing. Again, not the actual text. They can be from whenever. But if you're going to cite a source that's giving a review, it needs to be something within the last 5 years that's published. All right. When I said earlier about bias with sources, this is really hard to avoid because technically, unless it's a medical, social work, or something in the health field, chances are there's going to be some bias or opinions with any article or news that you find. So the trick is to acknowledge that. So what you really don't want to do is trick your audience. If your audience understands that the source you're using has a bias to it and that you've acknowledged that for them, then there's transparency. They understand what they're reading and where it's coming from. But if you try to pass it off as fact and then they argue with you or they're reading it and they're like, this isn't true, I know it's not true, then you will seem less credible as a writer. And the worst thing you can do, as you probably learned from English 121, is to ruin your ethos. You don't want to ruin your credibility because once you've done that, your audience is likely to not listen to you anymore. And then what's the point of your argument, right? So if you're going to use a source and you know that there's an inherent bias to it, you just need to make that transparent and noted to your audience. So I know that my little head box here has covered this up, but this would be an example of how you could state that. You could say, although Jernigan's writing has been labeled as, quote, highly conservative by the New York Times, I feel he still makes a valid point about immigration reform and one that needs to be explored further. And then I've included my little in-text citation, which we'll talk about in a minute. So as long as you make it clear to your audience what you're doing, then you'll be fine. You just can't try to pass off something as truth if it's opinion. You just have to make that distinction very clear. So again, these are all things that will come into play with our last paper, but I just want to make sure that you understand them now, so as you're thinking in the future, you can come back to this video and this presentation and kind of get some ideas generated. As far as credibility with sources goes, I will be checking your sources for papers 2, 3, and 4. Now in paper 2 and 3, the only thing you will probably be citing is your textbook, which is fine. That's a credible source. You don't have to question that. But with paper 4, you're going to have to find some outside sources. And I will go ahead and tell you now that Wikipedia, Ask.com, WikiHows, About.com, anything that has the word wiki in it is a no-go. That is not credible. And the reason why I've listed here for you is, one, anybody can edit these sites. The example I always use is that my friend Jairus in college, back when Wikipedia was first becoming a widely used site, is he actually went to Frank Sinatra's Wikipedia page, he clicked edit, and he put down a small blurb. He just put down that Jairus Bellamy was Frank Sinatra's spiritual advisor, and clicked save. And that was it. That's all he put down, was that little factoid in Frank Sinatra's Wikipedia page. About 3 months later, the Wikipedia Wikibots caught on that this lie had been inserted into the Frank Sinatra page, and they erased it. You won't find it now. However, within those few months, there had already been 2 different YouTube videos that were arguing about Frank Sinatra that cited Jairus as his spiritual advisor, and there were websites about Frank Sinatra and his biography that cited Jairus as his spiritual advisor. And all of these were false. It was complete malarkey. It was just complete lies. But these people cited Wikipedia as a credible source and spread this information further. So you cannot trust a site that anybody can edit, because there are always going to be, no matter what happens in life, there's always going to be trolls. There's going to be people who get online and put fake stuff out there because they can. It's like a human error. We're just like, oh, we can do that? Sure, let's do it. So if I see you use Wikipedia or any other wiki sites, I will not give you points for that being a source. So just know up front that these sites should not be considered credible. Now, if you're like some of my friends, you like to use Wikipedia as a launching platform. You're like, oh, I'll look this up on Wikipedia just to get a baseline of info about your source. If you want to do that, then scroll to the bottom of Wikipedia's page on whatever article you click on and cite the sources that Wikipedia is citing. Go to the sources Wikipedia cites and put those in your works cited page, because chances are it's going to have the same information you would have cited from Wikipedia, but this gives you more credibility and can show your audience that you're citing from actual sources, not just a bio page that anybody can edit. All right? And you can always ask me questions. If you're like, is this site credible? I don't know. Send it to me. Email me the site and say, hey, is this a credible site? And I'll let you know yes or no. So just keep those things in mind. All right, and then obviously by the URL, how you can tell a site is credible. The least credible sites are .coms or .nets, because these are commercial network sites. Anybody can buy a .com and post whatever they want. I could buy a .com and post and create my own website called thetruthabouttheenglishlanguage.com and just post a bunch of baloney. And unless you were someone that was educated in English and knew about the history, you may actually read my site and believe me. That's how crazy the internet is. It's amazing because we can look up anything at the blink of an eye, but it's terrible because anybody can post anything, even if they don't know if it's true or not. So you just have to be careful as researchers. .orgs are a little bit better. They're organization sites. But again, I've seen BigfootAnonymous.org, which was an organization of Bigfoot enthusiasts. So, and yes, I am saying Bigfoot is not real, because he's not. So just be aware of that. If it's a .edu or .gov site, I would consider it factual. One, because .govs are government sites, so they are obligated to post factual, dry information, and usually you won't really use a .gov site unless it's for a statistic or a very factual piece of information. .edu sites are school sites, and oftentimes a professor from a university in a specific major or field of research, they may actually post their articles they've published onto their school websites. So that's kind of neat. You can, if you're looking up information about an author, maybe this English professor at Cambridge University did an op-ed piece about, you know, Tolstoy or something that you could cite. Things like that are cool to find online, but just be aware that the URL does make a difference, and it does show you what you kind of need to watch out for when you look for sites. Okay, and again, these are questions to ask yourself if you're trying to determine credibility. Does the site have an author? If you cannot find an author, it's not a good thing. I will use our local paper, the disclosure, as an example. Whatever you think about the disclosure, something that irks me as an English professor is that there are, at least I've not looked at it in a long time. The last time I looked at it, there are not authors on any of the stories listed. Any newspaper like the Daily Register, the Money Saver, things like that, will have an author listed that shows you, you know, this author's proud of their work, they want to be recognized as writing this. The disclosure does not list authors, or at least it didn't the last time I looked at it. And that concerns me, because then it makes me wonder, well, who wrote this? Are these all written by the same person? That's problematic. Where do they find their information from? It just sets up questions about credibility. And if your reader has to question your credibility, that's not a good thing. Is your site advertising on them? I know that a lot of websites, they want to make money, and authors are trying to make money because the writing profession doesn't pay a lot. So chances are there will be ads on that site. Just make sure, if it's overwhelmed with advertisement, that may not be a good sign. And then, does the site look professional? You know, if it looks like something that somebody made in 5 minutes just to toss some information up there, it may not be credible. But if it looks like it's been professionally made, or the person's taken time to craft how the layout and everything looks, then that may add to the credibility of the source as well. You know, it'd be like going to the library and you find an embroidered and glossed encyclopedia that you can tell has clearly been manufactured and printed, and then there's like a stapled bunch of papers written in crayon. Which am I going to find more credible? Crayon or the embroidered and glossed encyclopedia? Just some simple things, but you know, I want to remind them to you guys. All right, and then facts versus testimonies. Facts obviously are objective, and testimonies are subjective. They're just based on that individual. So, and then finally, I forgot this section of the presentation, so long. Kairos. If you were in English 121, you probably learned about ethos, pathos, and logos. But Kairos is the other one factor of those, and that just means timeliness. So again, 5 years or younger should be what you're looking for with sources. If you get a little bit older than that, it's okay, but if you're citing something about, you know, literature from 1987, you might want to try to find a more relevant source. Okay? So, after that 20-minute spiel about finding credible sources, now, and I'll put a little time code on here, so if you need to jump back into MLA Basics, you can fast forward to this. The Modern Language Association. Let's go over the basics. So the Modern Language Association, or MLA, was formatted by basically a bunch of old white guys that were English majors to decide on how we give credit to where credit is due. And obviously MLA has expanded since its inception. There are now different diverse cultures on it, different genders, things like that make up the association and committees. So it's definitely changed since its conception, but the goal remains the same, that we find ways of cataloging and giving credit to authors and their research. Because people put in a lot of time and effort to create these, even if it's just a blog post. If you've ever blogged before, it still takes time to craft and edit and make sure that your writing makes sense before you publish. So it's not something to just be taken lightly, right? So MLA has two parts, two different ways in which you cite. One is the actual citations in the essay. These are called in-text citations. Oftentimes I think that they're a print link to tell us what site you're citing in the moment. Because if we didn't have these in-text citations, we wouldn't necessarily know which source you were citing where, and it may become confusing when you're trying to read the whole source or find more information out. The second type of citation is the works cited page, which is always the last page of your paper, and it's where you put your entire source and your entire citation. So there's two different things we will be citing when we do citations. One is the in-text citation, the other is the works cited page. And I am going to use this presentation to give you all kinds of examples, information, so please, like I said, save this presentation, look over it, use it as review, but also in your Cengage handbook, the wonderful new edition we've just started using, you got this little insert. I talked about this in our introductory video to navigate the course, but this little pamphlet that comes with your new handbook is awesome. It has not only examples in it of how to cite, but it shows you how to do a works cited page, it shows you how to do samples of each one, it shows you how to do in-text citations up there in the top corner. It gives you all sorts of information. So please reference this as well because it will be helpful. All right? So, in-text citations. These are the information bits that you put after you use a source in your paper. So, for example, I've got this little quotation. Professor Billingsley stated the importance of, quote, completing all the tasks of the project on time, end quote. This little section right here at the end of the sentence is an in-text citation. Now, a big question a lot of students ask, every time I include information from a source, do I have to include this? Yes and no. In a single paragraph, you do need to include at the end of the paragraph an in-text citation. So, I'm going to pull this up here. Anytime you use a source in your paper, you must place an in-text citation immediately after it and also cite on the works cited page at the end of the essay. Now, obviously, if I'm using a source multiple times within the paper, like 3 or 4 times in a paragraph, I don't have to include the in-text after each sentence in that one paragraph. I could just put it at the end of the entire paragraph. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to exit out of this for a second. Okay. So let's say, for example, in-text citation. Let's say I just have I'm just making this stuff up as I go along. All right, so I have my first instance where I use an in-text citation. I've quoted Dr. Richard Kingsley here, so I'm just going to say NY Times is my source. Now, if I'm doing something like this, all right, now if I have cited the same source 3 times in a paragraph, so I've cited the NY Times 3 times, it starts to look a little repetitive when you've got 3 of these in a row. So what you can do if you're citing the same source multiple times within the same paragraph, go ahead and indent that, is you can just save your citation for the very end. So yeah, so I've cited the same source 3 times, but I'm only going to mention it in my in-text citations at the very end of the paragraph. Now, if I did cite, let's say I put in an extra source in that same paragraph. So if I put the Science Daily Journal, and let's say I'm going to put the page number here. All right, now if I interrupt these sources, then I do need to go back and make sure that I include that. All right, so that you keep your sources straight, because I, the reader, may want to go back and check out this NY Times source, and then I'll be sitting there wondering as I'm reading it, hey, where's that thing about Science Daily? But if I include the actual in-text for it too, I'll know that these are 2 separate sources that you're citing in the same paragraph. And usually students don't cite multiple sources in the same paragraph, but it can happen. So as long as you're keeping everything straight for your reader to understand, you'll be fine. Now you may be asking yourself, do I need to cite any time that I use an outside source? Yes, anytime you are citing from a source or citing information from that source, even if it's not word for word. You'll notice in here, with this source, there's nothing in quotation marks. I'm not citing anything directly, but I am taking information from that source and putting it in my paper, so I do need to reference it. All right? You don't want to, if it's not something that you were born knowing, you need to include it. If it's something you read from a source, you need to include it in your paper and put an in-text citation with it. All right? So, back to this. All right. So, in-text citations, what we're talking about now. There are 2 ways to do in-text citations. They are either for print documents or they are for web documents. And a lot of people think that in-text citations are confusing. They're really not. You just have to kind of treat it as a hierarchy. So you always go with the top option, and if that doesn't work, you go with the next option, and if that doesn't work, you go with the next option. Chances are, 9 times out of 10, the very first option up here will work. So, for example, if it's a print source, like a textbook, or a novel, or a magazine, or a newspaper, anything that you can physically hold, that's a print source. So, if I'm doing an in-text citation for print, then the thing my always go-to should be the author's last name and a page number. If for some reason I mention the author's last name in my actual paper, then I want to go with the textbook or book or print title and then the page number. All right. So like here it says, the article noted, pandas are the cutest animals. I don't mention the author anywhere in here, so I'm going to put Billingsley and then obviously 14. You don't have to put P or page or anything like that, just Billingsley 14. That tells me everything I need to know. However, if below I put Billingsley pointed out, pandas are the cutest animals, well then I don't want to put Billingsley here again because that's kind of repetitive. So I can either put the book title, Cute 101, 14, or I can just put the page number. You just put 14 and be done. So if you're citing our textbook, for example, and you put, again, I'm going to go back to this page. If I cite the textbook, so print in-text citations. You can either put author, last name, and page number. So like Billingsley 14, or just the page number. And that's it. If it's a print source, that's all you have to do. Easy enough, right? Now, if I'm doing the web, it's actually even easier, and I will show you why. If it's a digital source, you do not have page numbers. Don't do where you put 1 and 2 and 3 in parentheses. That confuses me to no end, and I don't know why students do it. I'm not entirely sure why students do that, but don't do it. If it's a digital source like a website or a web article or a blog or a YouTube video, you're not going to have a page number, so you don't need it. Instead, what you're going to do is either put the author's last name only or the web URL, which my little block is literally blocking here. So for those, you're either going to put just the author, last name, and that's it. So just Billingsley, or the web URL basic form. So if I'm doing the NY Times, I would just do NY Times. And that's it. So for in-text citations, you really only have 4 total options of what you can do. And 2 of them are pretty similar. One's just the author's last name, page number. The other is just the author's name, or just the page number, or the web URL. That is it. You can do titles of books if you want. You can do titles of article, but they're just so long and distracting. Your in-text citation should just be a little blip to help people know what source you're citing where in your paper. So when you go to the Works Cited page, you can find the full source there. This just needs to be a little footnote almost. Just something simple for the audience to see in the moment. All right? So those should be your only options for in-text citation. Not too shabby. All right. The Works Cited page is arguably the harder part because you're putting the whole source there. There is a format to it. At the top of your page, you should always put Works Cited. I know some people put bibliography, some people put references, some people put works reference. Just put Works Cited. It makes things so much easier, and it's just helpful, and make sure to center it at the top of your page. So always start a new page for your Works Cited. When you get to the end of your essay, don't start it at the bottom or halfway through. Start a whole new page and then start from there. Your sources should also be listed in alphabetical order. So after you do your Works Cited, you may have to move some of the sources around to make sure that they are in alphabetical order. So going back to the sheet, if I were to start a Works Cited page, I would start a new page, and then in my center, I would do Works Cited, and then start from there. Okay. I do want to point out, and I'm going to keep this like this so that my little head thing doesn't block it off. Italics versus quotation marks. You have probably noticed in the discussion forum when I reply to your posts that I may be formatting the titles of books or names in a different way than you did in your post. And that has been my subtle way of trying to show you what the proper way of formatting these titles are. We either use quotation marks or italics depending on if a text is a large text or a small text. All right? So, for example, you'll notice on this slide here that the bigger texts are in italics. So, titles of books, titles of movies, titles of memoirs, titles of entire television shows, titles of the journal, web URLs in general, music albums, those are all big pieces of text and information. So they should be italicized with their titles. If you're citing the show Friends, Friends should be in italics. If you're citing an episode from Friends, that episode title is in quotation marks because it is a smaller text. So chapters of books, short stories, episodes of TV shows, poem titles, song titles, a news article or journal title, web page titles. These are all smaller parts of a bigger text. So the small parts are in quotation marks. The bigger parts are in italics, which is, of course, your little I button there. All right? So make sure if you're questioning what to italicize and what to put in quotation marks, that you come back to slide 17 here and look it over. Or write it down, print it off, take a snapshot with your phone, whatever you have to do. Just make sure to do that. All right? So, the basics of MLA. Each source, here's the thing about MLA. I love MLA because you can cite pretty much any type of medium, any type of media that you come across. You want to cite a YouTube video, you can do it. You want to cite a tweet, it's adorable. I love how you cite tweets, and I will show you guys how to do that because it's adorable. It's cute and precious. You can cite anything, pictures, movies, books. The only thing is, when MLA first started, there was only one type of source, a book. And so this formula was what they came up with. The author's last name, a comma, their first name, and then in quotation marks, the title of the work, the publisher, the date, and the medium, which back then was just print. We've come a long way since MLA started, and now we have dozens and dozens of different types of medium that we can cite. So MLA gets more and more complex, the more complex we make the media that we reference. So that's why it can be confusing at times, because you're like, well, why are these formulas different? It's like, well, they've changed them and tailored them for each type of media that we cite, and that's what makes it complicated. So hopefully if you pay attention to this presentation and you take notes, or you go back and print this presentation off and you have it with you, or you have this little document with you, it will help you as you cite. So books, for example, I've updated my presentation, so this is the most up-to-date, accurate way we do MLA books. Your format should look like this. The author's last name, their first name. Again, books are a larger text, so we put them in italics, their title, the publisher, and the year of publication. We actually no longer need the medium for books because it's just assumed that it's a book that you're citing. So here would be an example. Smith, John, a day to remember. The publisher is Penguin Press. The year it's published is 2012. That's it. That's all you need for a book. That's it. It's fantastic. I love it. But it's simple. And MLA has tried to make it a little more streamlined and a little bit simpler to cite. Now, in your little handy-dandy package here, they do show you how to cite if you have multiple authors. It's in the blue on this left-hand side. So if you're wondering how to cite or write names for multiple authors, it's there for you. So please make sure you look at that if you have questions about multiple authors. Web pages. Again, you'll notice the pattern is very similar when it starts out. We have our last name and our first name of our author. Now the title of the web page or the title of the article is a smaller part of the bigger website. So we put its title in quotation marks. We put the web URL, because it's the whole site, in italics. We do who publishes the website, the date it was published, and a link to the website. So you will probably notice that the web URL and the web publisher are very, very similar. So, for example, I'm going to exit out and show you. Tanya Murphy, Murphy, comma, Tanya, quote, immigration reform on the forefront. That's the title of the article. This is the web URL, NY Times. The publisher of the NY Times is, lo and behold, the New York Times Online. So you're going to have a lot of sites that have very similar URLs and publishers, and that's okay. Because really in our modern world of internet news, sites have to brand themselves to make it easy for readers to find them. So oftentimes the publisher and the website will be very, very similar. The date published is September 30th, 2014. So I will write it like this: day, month, year, and then I have my URL. So with dates in MLA, I don't know if this is military form or what exactly the form is, but you always do day first, then the month. If the month has more than 4 letters, you abbreviate it, and then the year. So month. So if you do May, June, or July, you can write those whole months out. If you're doing January, October, November, you need to have them abbreviated. Now, with the URLs, you only need the main part right after the title. So like NY Times would be the main part. You don't put the full link until the very end of the citation. So please keep that in mind. I have students that try to put the full thing right after the title. No, save it till after the date it was published. All right. Journals are without a doubt the hardest source to cite because there's so many different parts and pieces. And journals have actually changed a lot in the last few years in terms of MLA. The last couple semesters I taught MLA, the format was different. So it's kind of a learning curve for me too. I do like how MLA has shortened and streamlined everything. I think it's a lot easier to remember than it used to be. So for example, we have author last name, first name, the title of the article, the journal title in italics because it's a big journal, the volume, issue, year published, and then the pages. So for example, here's how you would cite a journal. We have Jane Doe, so we have Doe, comma, Jane. Pavlov's theory is the title of the article. The journal that the article is found within is the American Psychological Journal. It's volume 14, issue 5. The year it's published is 2014, and you actually do put PP for page 34 to 56. That's it. And that's a journal. So all the parts and pieces that you would need to find this article within that journal are right here. And then of course, if there are any other types of sources that you want to look up that are not found on this handy dandy card, or if you're like, I don't see it anywhere, where is it at? The Purdue OWL is fantastic, and you probably know about this site from high school or English 121. Purdue University in Lafayette, West Lafayette, Indiana, their English department is fabulous, and they have an entire division that just updates MLA. Isn't that wonderful? Don't you want to have that job? So if I click on this site here, I wish it would work. Yeah, open that up. All right. So this is Purdue OWL, and when you first get on there, and they've actually updated the site, it looks a lot more streamlined. When you actually upload the site, it may look a little bit overwhelming. But here's the thing that you should know. Under MLA, they give you in-text citations, the basics, which is awesome. They give you examples, which is even better. They show how to cite if you have a known author and then if you have an unknown author. Because, for example, what if you cite a piece of work that's from a medical journal? There may not be an author, so you might have to put the title of the article there. They show you all of those things. They show you how to cite books, which we've gone over, but they also give you really cool like electronic sources. So if you're going to cite, I'm going to scroll down here, a website shows you that. If you're going to cite an image, like if you go to Google Images for paper 2 and want to find a picture for your poems, it will show you how to cite that picture. if you want to cite an email for an interview. Emails are easy, and you can cite them here. It's just the last name, comma, first name, title of the email, received by whoever, and the date. Simple enough. Shows you how to cite a blog, and then my favorite, the tweets. I love that you had to put the handle and then the entire tweet. Fabulous. Then Twitter, the date, the time you published, who's publishing a tweet at 3:06 a.m., go to bed, and then the link. Simple enough. It shows you how to cite YouTube videos, which is the actual name of the person, or if you don't know the name of the person, the title of the YouTube video. You put YouTube because that's the URL, uploaded by whoever uploaded it, the date, and then the link. Simple enough. But Purdue Cite, I would definitely highly recommend bookmarking this on your computer, referencing it as much as you can. It's just very helpful. And there's, I would say, other common sources, interviews. Interviews are the easiest thing to cite. It's just name, personal interview, and date. Podcasts, published conferences, a song or an album like a Spotify or a CD. Who has CDs anymore? But you can cite those there. If you want to cite a film or a movie, like here, it's pretty easy to cite a film or a movie. Television shows, it shows you how to cite episode, a radio broadcast. There's so many things you can cite in MLA, and if it's not listed in this handout or on this presentation, then you can go to Purdue Owl and they will show you how to cite it, which is very handy. All right. So that is pretty much it about MLA. We are going to be doing a lot with MLA in terms of review. Towards the end of the semester, you're going to actually have an MLA exam where you have to cite formulas on certain MLA things, like how do you cite a book, how do you cite a web page, how do you cite a journal. So you'll have different things that you'll need to know. But as I've said before, this is a wonderful resource. Purdue Owl is a wonderful resource. There's even a section in our book here about citation. And of course, you have this video and you have this PowerPoint to help you cite. Citation is hard, but it's something that you are going to be doing throughout your college career, whether it's in a large capacity or a small capacity. And the more you can practice with it and work with it, the better off that you're going to be. All right, so as always, I hope this was helpful. Please keep this bookmarked, save this video, do whatever you need to do, and then as always, if you have questions, let me know. All right, I look forward to reading the rest of your papers, and I hope you guys have a great week and a great weekend. See you guys, and bye.